Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and as most of you already know, he is the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good.
Good. I have a little subject today. I want to talk about all the money you have in your pocket. I want to know how much cash you're carrying, because there's an attack on cash right now, and I think many people are recognizing this. More articles talking about what the government's going to do to crack down on those people who have the audacity to think that they can carry Federal Reserve notes around and spend them at will without a record made for the government. But that's exactly what's happening. I think many have heard about Louisiana. Here, I always have hope that the states would nullify federal nonsense, but here Louisiana says Louisiana bans cash transaction on used goods. That's not the whole thing, but it's in the wrong direction. Obviously, it's the federal government that's, that will be attacking the use of cash, and I think it's ongoing. But even some large banks are talking about it there. Citicorp economist says it might be time to abolish cash. But you know what I'm hoping is that people have conditioned themselves to using a lot of cash. I have. Sometimes I sort of get frustrated because every once in a while I use a credit card out of convenience. But this is something, though, that is very serious economically. It's an issue of liberty. It's an issue of privacy. But before we get into that, I want to show you a graph and show the audience a graph about the growth of the currency in circulation. Because we can take a look at that graph right now, and obviously there's exponential growth in the amount of currency. It's up to $1.3 trillion. But you know, not too long ago, if you look back to about 1970 there, it was practically at the bottom of the line. And something dramatically happened. And guess what happened in 1971? Of course, that was the elimination of the link to gold and silver, yes. You know. So a lot of people wonder, you know, where in thunder this cash is. Yeah. So
does it mean we're all rich now? Look at all that cash.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to have in your household $3,000 or $4,000 if you're the average household.
In cash.
But you may have a lot more than that for all we know. But no, the truth is that the average American family does not have it, because that's way over and above population growth, the growth of the money supply.
So it must have something to do with the dollar as the world's reserve currency? Yeah. I mean, where are these dollars if they're not here?
They're circulating around the world, and we get a free ride because when we export dollars, we're exporting the inflation, so they're not bidding up prices here. And so issuing a world reserve currency is an advantage. In the 70s, a lot of confidence was lost, and guess what? Those dollars came floating back, and that pushed prices up, and that's why we had a lot of price inflation. And right now, they're not coming back, but they probably will. They're still putting money in the bank. But one of the incentives for the banks, you know, want controls, because if we put our money in the bank and they hold it and they have it like in a treasury bill or something, they're talking about negative interest rates. There was one article out recently that said that in order to compensate for the problems we had in 2009, negative interest rates should have been 6%, which means if you put $100 in the bank and you take it out in the year, you get $94. It makes no sense. So that might give you an incentive to do what?
Spend it as quickly as you can.
Or just hold cash.
Hold on.
And but now we're having this desire to regulate cash. But this is ongoing. It's not new. Already over our history, there used to be there might have even been $10,000 bills that you could use in circulation, but they got rid of the tens and the fives, and now you can still have hundreds. But there was one suggestion that the solution to making sure people don't hold on to cash is to not allow you to have anything other than a $5 bill. There are some that want to get rid of everything. And I think they're responding to the argument that we make that poor people would be hurt the most with rules like this.
Yeah, because it's maybe harder for them to get bank accounts. Maybe they've had bad credit or something, and they're paid in cash.
And some of them are just old-fashioned. I have some house rentals, and some of them pay in cash. They get a paycheck, and they cash it, and they pay in cash, so, and they're not used to checking accounts. And some elderly people don't have that much. And used to be they would take their Social Security check, to the bank and cash it. Now I guess they've been forced into the system, but they still like to use cash. So I think this is going to get worse, not better.
One of the things looking at the Louisiana law that was disturbing, well, a couple of things really. The first of all, it turns a commercial transaction, it turns the seller into an agent of the state, in that you have to collect all of this information: driver's license number, vehicle license number, all of these things, everything that the person paid for in cash. So the poor person who's just trying to run a business is now going to be a tax agent for the state. But the other thing is, if it seems, at least it strikes me, is if this, travels around the country, more and more states adopt this, it seems like a perfect place for the NSA to find out about where we're moving, what we're buying, what our habits are.
And they won't hesitate. They're not bashful about trying to find out what we're doing. And there's already so much of this. There are currency transaction reports that have been, I think since the 70s. It was called the Bank Secrecy Act. Well, the Bank Secrecy Act said that the federal government's going to have all the secrecy and invade our privacy. But it originally started off, it was at $10,000. If you had a currency transaction of $10,000 or you're leaving the country, you would have to fill out a report. But then they stopped you from doing it. I mean, you were in big trouble. You would be harassed, and they'd sometimes, and they still do, confiscate your money. Oh, you might be a drug dealer. You're not a person who deals in cash. So it's become very cumbersome to, work in this fashion, and you're guilty until proven innocent. It's asset forfeiture. They come in and take this. But, in a free society, you ought to be able to spend your money the way you want, and there should be no need for records. And people say, well, it's convenient. Isn't it neat? I have a credit card. But one thing I have to remember, in a free society, you can have all the conveniences, but none of the annoyances of the government knowing everything. It's sort of like in medicine. It used to be a cash transaction between doctor and patient. Now everything is government paid for, everything is recorded. There's no medical privacy, and it's the same thing in finances too.
Remember back when you were in office and we were fighting against E-Verify, where the government had a big database and you had to prove you were allowed to work in the U.S. And you were worried about the false positives. But looking at this, if you don't have the option of cash, what happens if you get on one of these lists falsely, and the government just prevents you from doing any transactions whatsoever? It seems like it'd be a nightmare.
Probably sort of like when you get stopped at the airport, and I've heard cases of this, you just don't get on the airplane, because there's too many duplications, and governments tend to be inefficient. But the interpretation of the law becomes arbitrary too. There was a time I knew somebody was selling gold, and he knew the law. If you sell more than $10,000, you have to fill out a currency transaction report. And he would tell, if he had told the customer, no, I can't, if I do this, I have to fill out a report. So if the customer then buys $9,000 worth, and then a month later or something comes back and buys $5,000 of gold, that individual who told him what the law said could go to prison. Wow. Because they say you taught him how to structure. So merely telling people, what's going on, you can get into, a lot of trouble.
Keep the laws a secret then.
Well, that's for sure. But controls have been there a long time. It represents the destruction of money. The Romans, had runaway inflation eventually. Economic laws would bear down. If you violated the wage and price controls, you could lose your life. And yet they had lived hundreds of years, with a gold standard. So it happened back then, and what was the first thing they did in the Civil War? They got rid of the gold. And what did Roosevelt do as soon as he got in? He took the real cash from the people at $20 an ounce, and he immediately says, oh, it's worth $35 an ounce now. I mean, and that's the way they operate. So they will not be bashful about this. But to me, this represents an attack on liberty and a compensation for stupid, bad economic policies. And it's sort of like the doctor who has the patient come in and he knows very well that the person has a cancer. He says, "Oh, I have a pretty good drug here. It's called heroin or Demerol. I'll give you a narcotic. Oh boy, that makes me feel good." And of course, the patient dies with the cancer because he wasn't treated. And this is all this is trying to compensate for the mistakes and trying to attack the use of cash. But the use of cash is economic free speech. And the magnificence of the economy is everybody votes with that by spending their money. But if the government's involved in all these transactions, who's going to go through all these transactions? What is the natural tendency? And I think it could be the development of the black market. Yeah. But, you know, my guess is that the biggest promoters behind this are all those who believe in big government. That's conservatives and liberals. But my guess is Keynesian liberals are more interested in these kind of controls, you know, to make sure that they catch the drug dealers and make sure that big corporations don't circulate. But guess what? I think the biggest harm done is on the poor people here under these circumstances, you know, to go out and secondhand furniture and pay cash, and they won't be able to do this. So I think they suffer the most. What about, there was a group here in our town that my wife worked with, and it was called Bargain Box. And they would collect, you know, for clothing and other things, and they would sell it for cash. And can you imagine if you have to go through all this rigmarole? So it is the poor that suffer the most, and that is characteristic of an economy that overinflates its currency and overspends, and there's debt, and we know who gets bailed out when the crisis hits. So once again, this is a feeble attempt to attack some of the symptoms that they have caused by, you know, bad government. So that's where we are. So what do I expect to happen with this? I don't think they're going to call in all the cash. There's too much. But there will be continued controls. I think we'll eventually see a weakening of the dollar. A lot of that cash that we could see on the chart, that'll come flowing back here, and we'll see more price inflation. Then there's just going to be, it's conceivable we'll have price controls again. They've been around for thousands of years, and the last time we had them, just 40 years ago, we had them again, and it was during the Korean War. You know, we had wage and price control. That'll come back again, and obviously around the world, in the authoritarian governments like the Soviet system, they had strict controls, and you could lose your life with an economic crime. So I think that is the biggest fear that we have, is just more authoritarian, the authoritarian approach. They have no belief in confidence or understanding of how a free society works and why sound money is so important. But this whole idea, I mean, we were looking at the currency chart, and that's just part of it. You know, that's very small compared to all the credit and the bailouts and derivatives and the trillions of dollars that the Fed created on the bailouts. But the money issue is big. This is just a very small little symptom of an attack on a free society's approach to be able to use cash. So I vote for gold, and I vote for liberty.
Sounds good.
So anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and come back and visit us soon.